All right, Kiss Army, welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. Thank you for giving us your time today and letting us into your head. I hope we don't do any damage. We hope that you enjoy. Welcome to episode 317 of the KissFAQ Podcast. I'm your host, Julian Gill, and today I'm joined by author. You've got a whole bunch of titles. Robert Duncan, you were editor for Creem, you've written for Rolling Stone, Circus Live, you've written books. You have a new novel coming out called Loudmouth. Did I miss anything important in that brief synopsis of your life?
No, I think that's as much as I can handle, or as much as I can remember, let's say. But Thank you for having me, Julian. It's fun.
Well, thanks for joining us, because obviously you have a new novel coming out. Believe it's your first novel, Loudmouth, which is coming out via Three Rooms Press on October the 6th. But we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about your writing for magazines. Obviously, Creem is big in kind of the media at the moment because of the new documentary finally coming out. So can we start with that and your thoughts on the documentary that go back to, obviously, its foundations and your time as editor?
Absolutely. And no, the doc is great. So a few years, it must be now over 4 years ago, because I know that Scott Crawford, the director, and Jan Uhelski, who was co-producer, worked on that thing for more than 4 years. And in the end, at some point, a couple of years ago, they got me involved. So I get to have a nice little story consultant credit at the beginning and end, which was great. And then they got me to do a bunch of voiceovers because they interviewed me. And so that was fun. And then he said, I don't have anybody talking about Lester Bangs. And he said, could you do a thing about that? So I did that. And my wife, who's a photographer, has a bunch of photos in it. And in fact, the photos of Lester that I'm talking over while narrating his death circumstances are her photos, so that's kind of cool. But the doc, I was just before I heard about Scott Crawford getting this deal with the Kramer family, who owns all the copyrights. I had said to another friend, Creem, I said, God damn it, there really ought to be a documentary about Creem. And I said, do you want me to I have a young director friend who's into it. I said, do you want me to talk to him? And she said, yeah, oh, definitely, So I called him up right there from the bar. And I said, dude, are you really interested in doing a Creem doc? And he said, absolutely. His name is Sean Dunn. He's done a bunch of stuff. He's done a lot of cool. He did a music video for Gary Wilson, who was actually on my record label for one record. And he says, yeah, I'm into it. And so I said, well, he says, write me up something. So I wrote him up something. And about a month later, after we did all this, and I don't regret it, I thought, oh, man, I don't need to be sucked into working on a movie for several years. But I heard that Scott Crawford had made the deal. Scott Crawford is great. Salad Days, his previous movie about DC hardcore, is great. It was like, yeah. I don't want to do it, but I just need somebody who's credible and passionate about it to do it. So, and I feel like he really delivered. And we spent a lot of time during the course of the production. He would call. He started calling me after they interviewed me. He got me to do some voiceover, and then he'd ask me stuff about the magazine. And then he would ask me more and more about the magazine. And then he would send me cuts and segments and cuts. And he would say, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And so then he told me, he says, I'm going to make you story consultant because you've done so much. But it was really entirely a pleasure. I'm really gratified, and I'm really happy with how the movie came out. And I'm gratified that it's out there. And, there was a time I thought, well, Creem is just going to disappear. And when I was working there, I knew it was special. And I knew there were special writers and special dynamics within the organization. And it was just, it wasn't, but I thought, it's in Detroit, and it's trashy Creem. And, it's not going to be remembered, and I'm really happy it is, and I'm happy I can be part of that memory. So.
Yeah, it got rave reviews when it debuted at South by Southwest, I think in 2019, maybe late 2018. Yep. But now it's available, for people to see finally. What I like about, Creem magazine, obviously in the 70s, I was just, a kid. I wasn't even in the country. So I never got to experience Creem live and in Technicolor during its heyday, which would have been the 70s rock scene and pop culture and everything that went with that. But I watched an interview of Listen to Luch, and Mary described Creem as the music magazine you graduated to from Mad Magazine. Now, what do you think of that and Creem from the perspective of that kind of where it was put together, the cast of characters who were writing for it? Obviously, you were editor. What was the scene that made it so special to you?
Well, it's probably one of those things you can't. There's no formula for it. You couldn't recreate it, I don't think. It was a bunch of personalities that came together that it just worked, even when it didn't, even when they were fighting with each other. But Mad Magazine is a good reference point. I've heard people compare it to it's a combination of Mad Magazine and Esquire in the heyday of Esquire. So kind of it was because there was parts of it that were literary, and Lester Bangs, who was is certainly now the most well-known writer out of it, and was really a mad genius. He definitely had the sophistication of an Esquire writer. There was always stuff in his stories where you're like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that reference is. I don't care. It's still great or funny. So there was but in terms of the Mad Magazine thing, it was definitely satirical. I've often described it as the satirical rock magazine. And it was about being funny too. I mean, there was nothing more. If we could get a laugh out of a reader, if we thought we had done something funny, that was like, that's what we were going for. More than musicological thoroughness or even competence. If it was funny, all right, that's what we want. So you can go through that Creem magazine, and it's like Mad. Mad used to have things in the gutter, and it would have the fold in, and it had all sorts of stuff. Well, Creem there would be funny shit in the table of contents. That thing was really worked on. Some of the subheads and headlines and subheadlines and the table of contents and picture captions, famous for its picture captions. And it was an enormous thing to put together, too. I was a managing editor, and so I was in charge of kind of bringing everybody together and getting all the product together and all the copy and chasing down the copy when some freelancer didn't turn it in. And there was just a ton of stuff. You'd realize, oh, shit, we didn't do the table of contents. We didn't do a caption for this photo, and on and on.
Right, and you read back through that, and again, a lot of the same cast of characters wrote for Rolling Stone, and these are kind of high caliber, smart writers, because to me, there's a similarity with like the intelligence put into Monty Python and the work that went into all of those sketches. It wasn't just thrown together haphazard. It was very much thought out and then executed with a vocabulary that, made it very clear that this wasn't just haphazard, off the cuff. Not that there wasn't, haphazard stuff. There was still, thought going into the process.
And if it appears off the cuff, all the better. That's what isn't that the great thing about Monty Python or any great comedian? It appears like it's not been labored over, or a great novel for that matter, that it appears like it hasn't been labored over, whereas secretly it has been labored to death, So
let's talk a little bit about Loudmouth. I'm going to jump around just because that's very much kind of how the book is for me. So, you've kind of described the book as a veiled memoir, and you're probably going to be so tired of hearing that phrase thrown back at you. Is that somewhat akin to saying based on a true story, but the names and places have been changed to protect the guilty?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I had many acquisition editors when I was peddling it around would say to me, well, why don't you just make this a memoir? And I'm like, because it's not a memoir, and I don't want to make it a memoir, and I don't want to piss off the people anymore that are in the story uh, more or less who they are than I have to. And it was just like, and I think the biggest thing is I wanted to write a story as I remembered it, which is that's what they call a memoir. But I wanted to. I didn't want to have to ever think about the facts. I wanted to remember what I remember. And somebody says to me, well, it didn't happen that way. Well, fine. It's a novel. And, but it wasn't all about evading blame or responsibility. It was about also, having fun with it. I just didn't want to be, I didn't want to be looking over my shoulder all the time. Oh shit, that's not the true story. But the funny thing is, people say to me, "Oh, you got to tell me if this happened." And there haven't been a lot of readers yet. There's just reviewers, advanced review readers, or they call it, and they say, "You got to tell me if this guy's for real or if this thing happened." And I said, "Here's a good rule of thumb: the most outrageous stuff probably happened. The less outrageous stuff that's just connective tissue."
Right. So together the story. I mean, you've been working on this book for a while, haven't you? It's been, I believe, you mentioned on the Izzy interview that it had been 6 years in the works.
Oh yeah.
What's the genesis of the project and how it's taken you 6 years to now bring it into print and to be happy with the end result?
Almost finished with the audiobook too. 15 more pages. I'm very excited.
15 more pages to convert into audiobook. That'll probably take a few weeks to edit.
Well, it's been edited for content. It's now, I have a studio. I'm in my studio now, and I thought, well, all right, I'll read it. I didn't want to do it any other way. I don't buy any audiobooks that aren't read by the author. And then I thought, well, what the hell? I can edit it too. Why have somebody else editing it and editing it for content and, finding the best take. That's one thing. But then going back and editing it for technical stuff, that's no good. That's no good. Let me just warn your audience, never do that. That's taken me, I'm 10 weeks into that process. But I got 15 more pages to go, and I think I could finish it if I stay up late. Oh shit, what were we talking about?
The genesis of Loudmouth.
Yeah. The genesis of this. It wasn't ever intended to be anything. It was almost in San Francisco. I was the witness to a suicide in San Francisco, just out of the blue one morning. I'm just minding my own business, and it was really awful and terrible. It's not a fun story, but and I found after that I was having trouble sleeping, and it was just really kind of having deja vu about all this stuff, PTSD type stuff, and I just started writing. I found myself writing. I was just writing, and I would write anytime I had a free moment, and I would write at night, and I would write weekends, and it felt like I just had to write. And this went on for like 13 months, and at the end of 13 months, I felt much better. And I thought, well, what is this shit I've been writing? And it was like stories, and it was impressions, and it was this and that. And I thought, well, is there anything I can do with this? So I, put it all out on the floor, and I said, well, if I took this one out, this one doesn't seem to fit, but if I took this one out and I added another kind of transitional story in here and this and that, and I thought, well, I'd have a bunch of linked short stories. And in the end, I thought, well, I'm just going to keep going and try to shape it into a novel. And I don't care about a novel that's has a real arc, because this is not, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy finds girl again, and whatever it is. I think arcs can be corny, and maybe I can't do them. But so I thought, well, let me shape this into a novel, and it's taken that long. It may have been easier to write it as a novel from the beginning than to start with this weird catch-all of, psychodrama, and try to bring it all down. But that took 5 years, good 5 years, 13 months of writing, and then probably another year of writing along the way. But as I edited it, yeah.
Right.
Well, it's a terrible process. Never write a book.
Yeah, I'm
That's my PSA.
Totally the wrong person to tell that to, but
no, I know you have a book. I'm addressing your audience. Don't.
I agree with it. Just don't do it. There's nothing to resolve in the book, because it is a series in some ways of vignettes of stories and scenes, and again the connective tissue that you do mention. And I can understand people asking, how much of that is true? How much of that is embellished? And you perhaps taking the Fifth Amendment on all of those.
Oh, no,
but there's one
like I said,
thing.
The outrageous stuff is true, is factual. It's all true. The outrageous stuff is factual, and the other stuff is sometimes not. I mean, yeah. But I'm happy to talk about all that. It's interesting to me.
I think a lot of people are going to connect with it, when they do read it. The characters like Sandy, those dangerous people in your youth. I think we all have a Sandy in our life, hopefully that we survived without us ending up, having it beat out of us in, the services. But one of the scenes, I guess as the Kiss fan or the Aerosmith fan in me, that really struck me was the Joe Strummer. We all got to make a living. Because that's a segue into something that is kind of spoken about. And there's the English version for anyone else who's not seen it out there.
And then there's the Japanese.
There was the Japanese one as well. This, I believe, was the first unauthorized Kiss bio to hit the market. I know Swenson came out later that year. But you'd been working on this. It starts in 1976 at Roosevelt Stadium. How did you get the gig to write this book that now, has just about every Kiss collector has it in their collection to this day?
Yeah, it's amazing. It sold a lot of copies. It sold, maybe 400,000 or 500,000 around the world, which was pretty astonishing. I was a broadcast writer living in New York at that point, and I, royalties are always way backed up with books, and the first royalty statement I got was like zip, nothing. It was like, oh shit, I was hoping to pay the rent next month, and then 6 months later, you get them every 6 months, as you know, and it was like, I don't know, whatever it was like $20,000, which was like $200,000 at the time. To me, it certainly was. And so it worked out. How did I get the gig? I had written Kiss stories for. I guess I ended up writing it for Creem, but I wrote for Circus about Kiss. I wrote all these Kiss stories. And when I left Creem and I went freelance, I discovered that, if I could always sell a Kiss story. So I was doing it for Gig magazine and for Circus and for Phonograph Record magazine. There is not a rock magazine I didn't write for and probably wrote a Kiss story in them. And I kind of got into a game where I would write, a really positive story one week, the greatest band in the world, and then a really negative story in another publication the next week. And I would just, oscillate like that. And I thought that was funny. That just struck me as funny. And so I'd been doing, and I'd seen them. And one of the first stories, that's funny. One of the first stories, I lived in New York most of my life, although I've been now out in the Bay Area, 30 years. But before that, I did go to Detroit for a while. And for a year in the early 70s, I went to San Francisco. I had been in bands all my life. And when I went to San Francisco, because I was just tired of the latest band breaking up, just when you get to the cusp of success, and the drummer quits or explodes, as the case may be. And so I came out to San Francisco, and I thought, well, maybe I'm a good writer, so maybe I'll write what you know, and so maybe I'll write about rock and roll. And I met a guy I was looking for an apartment. I was looking for a cheap apartment, and I saw a sign outside a basement apartment. It was the end of a long day, for rent. And so I pull the car over and I go running over there. And a guy comes in from the other direction and he says, "Forget about it. I got it." And I go, "Ah, shit." And so I said, "Well, you mind if I look at it anyways? You're just exhausted and frustrated." And so I went in and I looked, and he came in and he was carrying a box of whatever, and he put the box down, and under the box there he was wearing a lanyard with a press pass. And I go, "Well, hey, what's up with that? Why do you have a press pass?" And he says, "Well, I'm a writer and I'm an editor." I said, "Oh yeah, who I'm looking to get into that kind of thing. Who do you write for and edit for?" And he was like, "Rolling Stone, Creem," and he just went on and on. City magazine, there was magazines out here that he worked for, and he just went on and on. And it turned out this was Ed Ward, who some people may know from he was on Terry Gross Fresh Air for 20 years as the rock historian. He's written a kind of definitive history of rock. He was one of the first, if not the first, record review editor at Rolling Stone, and he was the West Coast editor of Creem. That's how he was my bridge to Creem. He introduced me to another friend, and we ate dinner all the time together, the three of us, because Ed liked to cook. And the other guy was John Morthland, who was also an amazing writer and musicologist, and a guy who was, early on hip hop and early on country music, and he was an amazing guy. He just died a couple of years ago, and these guys were a little older than me, and so John was hired as the interim editor at Creem because Lester kept chasing away editors, and so John, but everybody loved John. So John went there, and Barry Kramer, the publisher, said, "You got to help me get this shit organized." And so John went there, and he called me up, and he says, "Hey, you want to come to Detroit and be like copy boy?" And I had only just started my career. I'd done a few freelance pieces, including for Creem, and one of them was, they said, "Well, you go out with this manager and meet this band," and it was Kiss, and it was Bill O'Coin, and I went and interviewed Kiss for Creem, one of my first assignments, and it was the day Paul Stanley showed up late to the interview, and he came in, he says, "Look at this," and he had just gotten that rose tattoo that he has, so I got to see it right off the bat with the antiseptic grease on it, and so he got it, I think, from Lyle Tuttle, who I later got a tattoo from. So and he was the guy who did all the rock stars in the 60s. But so John went to Creem, called me up, and I went to Creem, and I moved to Detroit, and I and then Lester chased out one or another more editors, and within a very short time, I had become managing editor. I was way underqualified, but I guess I had a knack for kind of everybody having fun and kind of being a cheerleader, and I'm a pretty good editor, and I was an okay writer at that time, I think, and so yeah, that was it. And then Lester and I got to be great friends, and became great friends with Jan Uhelski, and even with Barry Kramer, the publisher, who was kind of Lester's kind of bête noir. They fought a lot.
Yeah, that whole Detroit scene in the mid-'70s, I mean, that was where bands, Detroit, Cleveland, that whole Midwest, Kiss made it because of that area. Rush made it because of that area. Ted Nugent came out of it because of that area. Utopia was, coming through there with those bands, opening for Aerosmith, Derringer, So, I mean, the scene.
Seeger, Alice Cooper,
endless. MC5.
Earlier. MC5 and Stooges had kind of died or gone on hiatus by the time, I was there in 75 and 76. And, I mean, they kind of were almost stillborn. Both those bands did a few records, but, they didn't get any support. Record companies weren't sure what to do with them. all that. But of course, Iggy was around, and the guys from the MC5 were around. I remember going to Rob Tyner, the lead singer's house. He was this firebrand on stage, the guy who sang "Kick Out the Jams, Motherfuckers," and go to his house, and we sat around the kitchen, and he and his wife served us tea, and it was just and like normal tea, not like pot tea or something. And it was so wonderfully normal and ordinary a house. And he was a sweet guy. So they were all still around, and you got to meet him. And I remember I've told this story. Maybe it's in the book. Yes, it is. It's in Loudmouth, where I went to interview David Bowie, and they said, "Well, wait here in the hotel room." And it was really dark in there. They had it all atmospheric. And with the Keith Richards like scarves over all the lamps and all that shit. And I'm sitting there, as my eyes adjust to the dark, I realize it says in the book there's a guy on the couch, but it was actually a guy in the other bed, in the other of two beds. And I'm like, wait a second, this guy's sleeping in there, and it was Iggy Pop. His little platinum hair, and so that's how I met Iggy Pop. He was sleeping in the other bed in Bowie's room.
What is it in your youth that set you on the path into writing, and specifically, I guess, for the most part, into musical writing?
Yeah. Well, I think I was always musical, and I was always, as a kid, I did badly in school except for in writing. I was always good in English when I read the books, which wasn't always, but I seem to have a knack for writing. I have newspaper people in my background, and my grandmother was an opera singer, so we had music kind of in the background. And although my mother is tone deaf, so I think, and my father worked in business, and I just thought, wow, I said, I'm just going to shoot myself if I have to do that. So I always kind of had this artistic bent, and I wasn't, where other kids were reading the sports pages, I would read the music pages. I would read the theater and the dance pages, just because I liked all the way people talked about, artistic projects, creative projects. And so it was clearly in me from the beginning. And, when I fell in love with music, I just fell in love very hard and deep. And it was just, it would just made me crazy. It still does today. Great music just gets under your skin like nothing else. So, and I had this older brother who's the basis of the character Sandy in the book, and he was like a hot rod gangster. He was way older than me, and so I'm like 7 or 8, and he was like 16, 17, and he's driving around in a hot rod car that he souped up, and I found guns under his bed. But I remember distinctly one day, one and only one day, our mother and my brother and I, my younger brother and I, our mother had to go out, and she said to my older brother, she says, "Will you take the kids to get some dinner? And here's $2, because that's how cheap it was." So she said, take them, go get them food. And so he threw us, he was bitter about this, threw us in the back of his hot rod and driving like a maniac. And we're just flying around because you remember nobody wore seatbelts. And he's catching air. And we go down to the drive-in where he likes to hang out and where the waitresses come out on their roller skates. And but all the way down there, he's got the radio cranked to the max, and it's this guy singing about a hound dog and just screaming and yelling. And I'm like, it was like the whole thing was so terrifying. And then this guy, this ill man in the dashboard singing about a hound dog. And of course it was Elvis. And so I was traumatized the first time I was exposed to rock and roll at the age of 7 or 8. And the next day I went to school, and I went to a Catholic school, and we're doing our hymns, or we got our music class, and I start to imitate Elvis in the singing class. And so I was horrified at one moment, and then I was somehow instructed. And that was the day, and this is in Loudmouth, that the nun called home and said, I think your son has perfect pitch. And that's the first and only good call I ever got in my school career.
So that's a little bit of a musical epiphany, because that was going to be a question. What was your musical epiphany? Elvis, Hound Dog, is different than, I guess, what we hear from so many people. Ed Sullivan, Beatles, 64.
Then Beatles 64, Ed Sullivan was like, that's when, it was like, okay, this is going to be my life. That's it. So, I had that epiphany. But because I had this crazy, wild, much older brother, I got exposed. I mean, what I love is I got to be there at the beginning of rock and roll and maybe at the end, depending on your opinion.
Absolutely. And one thing that kind of enthralled me because of writing some stuff about Ace Frehley recently was you were talking about the Murray the K review shows at the RKO on 88th. And he went to the same one that you attended with was it Mitch Ryder on the top of the bill? I think it was the first New York or first U.S. appearance of Creem and The Who.
Oh shit! I forgot about Creem. I guess I could find that poster online, but I was trying to remember all the amazing bands. I saw it at the RKO 58th Street. He probably saw it. It probably went to. There was an RKO at 86th Street too, which sometimes I would go to. But so. I don't know which one he saw it, probably at 86th Street, but it was Mitch Ryder. And, I was like, maybe I was 12 years old, and it may have been the first concert I ever went to. And I went with a couple of my buddies, and we're little kind of, preteen guys, and we're trying to be tough guys. And we're standing outside and we're looking at the pictures. We knew Mitch Ryder. We loved Mitch Ryder. We knew Sam and Dave, loved Sam and Dave. I don't know if Wilson Pickett was on it.
Yep, it's Smokey Robinson.
Was Smokey Robinson? Well, Vanilla Fudge was on it because I remember, and we liked Vanilla Fudge. And then there was this band outside. They were pictured. And the singer had like this just kind of, had beautiful blue eyes and this blonde hair. And he was so girly looking that there was no way me and my little fellow macho men we weren't gonna stay for that shit. And of course, I later became a huge fan of Roger Daltrey and The Who and Pete Townsend and saw him a million times. But we walked out. We weren't going to subject our fragile machismo to such an onslaught. No, yeah. Mitch Ryder was our favorite, and a few years later, maybe it was 8 years later, maybe I was 20. No, maybe I was 22. And I had a friend, Eric Genheimer, who worked at Creem, and he also played guitar. And he wound up playing guitar in Mitch Ryder's band. And he said, hey, Mitch, or Billy, as he called him, which is his real name, Billy's coming to New York. And I told him, maybe it'd be fun for you guys to get together, that you would show him a good time. And so he called me up, Mitch Ryder, my fucking hero from childhood. And he says, hey, you want to do something? So I went out with Mitch Ryder. I don't even know where we went. We got so shit-faced. And we wound up at an after-hours bar in New York, an illegal after-hours bar, a real mafia joint where you go down the stairs, a literal dive, and you knock on the door, and I'm not kidding you, a guy opens a little peephole, and you say, Nick sent me, or you had to know a bartender's name, and we had Nick sent me. Okay, they let us in, and they had this kind of rigged gambling in there, and you're drunk, so you start playing it and lose all your money. And then you're trying to beg the bartender to let you run a tab, and that doesn't work in a mafia joint. So, but I remember Mitch Ryder. We had the greatest night. We had the most fun. We were just howling, and and he's in the middle of the place. He grabs me by the shoulders. He says, "This is the greatest night of my life." And then I don't know how he got home. I know I got threatened with death by a drug dealer in Washington Square Park when I told him to fuck off. And then about a year later, he came back to town. He says, "Hey, let's do it again." And I had a book contract at the time for this book, The Noise. Those are a couple of that's another one of the books I wrote. And I was way overdue on it. I said, "Oh, Mitch, I just can't do it. And I got to do this thing. I'm right on deadline." And Mitch Ryder never called me again. So
Ouch.
now I regret that. I'm like, But so anyways, I wound up having a great time with the guy I had gone to see at the Murray the K review at RKO 58th Street.
Wow. Great. That's a great story as well. I want to ask you about one of your, I think it was the only review you did of Kiss albums in Rolling Stone or for Rolling Stone magazine. The Kiss solo albums in 1978. Did you draw the short straw for that? How did that review come about? And, what did you think of Kiss come 1978? You obviously saw Paul Stanley and Kiss in 74 when they were black leather. They were tougher, or in terms of image, and then you see them in 1978 with 4 independent pieces of music. I mean, you start out that article with "Good taste is murder to rock and roll." That kind of.
Well, it's funny that I, everybody knew I was writing these Kiss stories, my yin and yang Kiss stories, negative and positive, all the time. So I believe Dave Marsh, who was the record review editor of Rolling Stone, ex-editor of Creem, he's the guy who got me into Rolling Stone, and he called me up and said, "Hey, I believe it was him, called me and said, 'Hey, would you review these solo albums, the new Kiss solo albums?'" So, I'm like, "Okay, sure." And they were, it's going to be a big deal. In fact, I saw it in layout. I was very excited. It was going to be my biggest byline in Rolling Stone, and Dave edited and approved the copy, and everything was going along swimmingly. And I don't even remember what I said in those reviews, but I always took a tongue-in-cheek approach to Kiss, perhaps as they do to their music sometimes, and their image for sure. And then Marsh calls me and says, "Jan Wenner killed it. He killed it." It's like, oh yeah, why'd he kill it? Well, he made excuses about it being, it was too juvenile or whatever. And I think it was very much Creem writing, and it wasn't Rolling Stone writing. And at that point, Rolling Stone is trying to be, transitioned into being a grown-up, or had already transitioned into being kind of an empty-headed grown-up, as a matter of fact. But and so he killed it. I was so mad. I thought, well, why isn't everybody at Rolling Stone quitting because they killed this Kiss review? And I think I heard later, or maybe I heard at the time, that Wenner just hated Kiss. Now, I made fun of Kiss a lot, but I didn't hate them. Anyways, he hated Kiss, didn't want to be associated with them. And I think, I like to think, rather than my subpar writing, it was his taste.
Yeah, it's definitely got a very Creem feel to it. I mean, just the byline itself, "Feeble Foreplay," the big kiss off of 1978. It's just, it is fantastic, but for a moment in history as well. I think the whole story about Kiss versus Rolling Stone is overblown, because a lot of the reviews of their early albums by, the other writers were positive. So, that's all kind of irrelevant to us. But at least, I guess from our perspective of this discussion, you had one review of Kiss albums in Rolling Stone during your time there.
That one got killed, so that never appeared. I've seen it only recently. I thought, well, I'll look for it online, and I found it online somewhere, or maybe I found it in my own computer. I don't know. But yeah, so it may be just floating out there, but it never ran.
Yeah. So going back to that Joe Strummer quote, of "We've all got to make a living." How difficult was it for you as a writer to flip between positive, negative, writing for specific, magazines? Each have their own style. What were the challenges for that?
Well, I didn't, except for Rolling Stone, I didn't have to flip much. I mean, I was writing for Circus, and I had a column in this magazine called Gig. I had a couple of columns. I can't remember. I think Phonograph or PRM or something, a phonograph record magazine. I can't remember, but I wrote for a lot of them. So I was just writing the same old shit I was writing for Creem. So I didn't feel constrained by anybody except for Rolling Stone. I remember at Circus, it was Paul Nelson, who used to be at Rolling Stone then, or no, he was at Rolling Stone. At some point, he was at Rolling Stone. He was a guy who kind of gave Dylan his record collection, or Dylan stole Paul's record collection, and that's how he learned about Leadbelly and Woody Guthrie and all that. So Paul is this enormously influential person, now gone, and he got me into Circus when I came back from Detroit. And then I remember Gerald Rothberg, after Paul left the editorship of Circus, said, "You want to be editor of Circus?" And I thought, well, no, now I'm on my big move I'm going to become a major American novelist. And, so I'm leaving that behind. And, I probably shouldn't have left it behind.
Yeah.
So there were some lean years in there.
You reprinted, I think, in 2014, you did a reprint of the Kiss book on Lulu. Did you ever do a reprint of Noise?
No, but it was on my to-do list, and it's just the reason I did the Kiss one is a guy called me up and said he wanted to do an audiobook of the Kiss book. And I said to him, well, I thought, here's my opportunity because I can get my copyright back because it had lapsed. And it had lapsed from the publisher, and it reverts to the author at some point. And I thought, okay. I said, well, here you go. I'll let you do an audiobook. I'll give you the rights to do an audiobook if you also do a print book. And he said, well, let me think about it. And he got back to me. He says, I don't know about print books. I don't want to do a print book. I want to do an audiobook. And I'm like, all right. And I thought, in the meantime, I had been thinking to myself, wait a second. I can do a print book. I can do it via one of these, print on demand, Lulu, the Amazon company. And so I did. And I thought, and I didn't. You notice you don't happen to have it there, and I don't happen to have it here either. It's somewhere in my house. But the cover in the original, it's kind of a circle. I decided I'd do a facsimile of the original cover, but I didn't want to track down and then pay money to the photographers for the original book. So I thought, well, shit, I'm not going to rip off the photographer. So I thought I got to get something else to put in there, the center of the cover. And at my work, everybody knows I'd done this Kiss book. And for my birthday one year, a woman commissioned an oil painting of me as Gene Simmons. And I'm drinking my cup of tea and I'm kind of wearing a suit, which is not something I actually wore at work. And I was just saying to my wife today, I said, where is that damn painting? Because I should have it up in here. It was in my office, and I'm looking across the room, and there it is. And I said, there's my fucking cover. So if you look at the Lulu, if you look at Amazon for it, that's the painting. So
nice. Let's wrap up with, I guess, one last question. I mean, it comes back to, again, Creem, but connects with Loudmouth. Adjectives like irreverent, sophomoric, relentless. I find that good to describe Creem, but also sections of your book. And there are sections of your book that are really, I found it a little bit uncomfortable because, again, it was holding up a mirror to my own experiences. Yeah. How much of that do you just think is a common story with like turbulence of our lives and turbulence of the past and, where we were in 1967, the late 60s and now, and, all of these elements kind of coming together? I hope that question makes sense because it doesn't seem to make sense when it's come out.
Well, it's multidimensional, Julian. But I would say that, we all have that story. We all have crazy shit that's happened to us in life. I really believe this. But some of us are interested in telling about it and interested in exploring it further and kind of like obsessing over it. So, I'm still obsessing over my teenage years, and even earlier, So this is a coming of age novel. So it covers from about, 7 years old to I don't know, 27. So I think we've all got, weird stuff and terrible stuff and sad stuff and happy stuff. And just some of us want to explore it. And that's when you become a writer, or an artist. You have to do it. So it really is a compulsive thing. And all my life, people have been telling me, when I left kind of the music business and I had to earn money to pay for my kids. They would say, I would just tell stories, bullshitting around the break table or in the bar afterwards. And they'd say, God damn, you really ought to write these stories down. So I always had that in the back of my mind that maybe I could string some of these stories together as a book. And again, then I had this traumatic thing. So it's a big mishmash of techniques and motives and everything. But yes, it's amazing to me that I think today, talking about Juvenile, I think I write like I did when I wrote it, Creem. And I always think, well, that stuff sucked. And I'm a much better writer now. And every once in a while, I don't like to look back at my old writing, but every once in a while I'll be confronted with some of it. And I'll think, wow, that reminds me of me today. And sometimes I won't even recognize the writing. I'll think, oh, that's not me. Oh, wait a second, that is me.
Well, today in 2020, reality is Mad Magazine. So
it's true.
Robert Duncan, thank you for joining us on the KissFAQ podcast. Loudmouth, a novel, again, is going to be out on October the 6th. It's available on Amazon. You can also get it through Robert's website, duncanwrites.com.
And it's available for pre-order now, and it's going to be in bookstores everywhere. And it's if you don't like corporate book selling, it's on bookshop.org. It's on all the major websites available for pre-order.
And there'll be an Audible version coming out once you get through those final 15 pages.
Oh my God! After we hang up, that's what I'm going back to.
Robert, thank you very much for joining me. It's been an honor and a pleasure to talk to you. You've written articles that I've read over the years, and it's really great to know that you're out there, you're still writing, you're still working, and you're still entertaining.
Well, I appreciate it, Julian. It's been a lot of fun, and now that I know you're a Bay guy, we'll have to keep in touch.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for spending time listening to the KissFAQ podcast today. All sales are final. There are no refunds. If you'd like, look us up on Facebook or come over to the KissFAQ message board and discuss the topic we've broadcast today. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes, Spreaker, or wherever you've listened to the show. We hope you'll join us again.